kick out town? I left early today. Yesterday I left late. I left at 8:20. Got here at like, I think it was like 8:55. So that's cool, like whatever.
Dude, like, yeah, he stays in the same, like, we stay in the same fucking house, and, like, I would get up and leave before in my car, and by the time I get done parking, like, in the garage, and all that shit, and I'm like, I'm walking in place, and Marco is there, and he's fucking good. I don't know if he gets up late or just rides like hell up there or some shit, like, every fucking time when he meets me up there, I get up late before.
Where did he come out?
He said he's from Houston. Every time I talked to him, I remember the first day I walked in the house, I was like, oh, he must be from overseas or something, like, long before Florida. I was like, yeah. I knew he didn't say he was here.
They said he came from Big Lifton, if I'm not sure. I don't know.
Second day, the third day.
Hello.
Does he prefer himself
I have no
as ask him? I don't care. I don't have I'm a programmer. Because I'm a programmer. That's what you're saying.
I've never seen my office practice in what are you?
Last person out.
Because I mean,
I don't have a problem.
First day I played, so I thought he was going to be like late 1:30.
yeah.
So I was like,
Or like some Russian guy from Russia, some Russian guy,
shit
like,
like that. Yeah,
then he came today with his skirt on, you know what I'm saying?
I guess this is some weird thing.
He's fucking his kid, that's all I was like, is he Irish?
I didn't know what it meant.
I'm just always curious about it.
I'm not going to talk. Well, maybe at the very beginning that makes sense.
I mean, like,
Figure I might as well just set it up here.
if it's me, like, dude, I'm not trying.
Guess I should disable this.
Yeah. So I think the worst thing is
There we go.
not live in
Look at that. Damn, that's professional.
Oh, on the stream I have something else.
Oh, you don't have to have this up. Okay, cool. That'll be good. He's got a microphone, but I could probably use that just for intros.
Just turn it off when you're done. You're good.
Okay, yeah. We could have.
No, it'll be fine. So we'll just have one mic here, kind of. Yeah. No, because it's not. It's not.
It's separated.
Yeah. It wouldn't be coming out of your speakers, so it's not coming out of the mic.
I would be hearing echo.
If you are, then we can just have whoever's. I'll probably just use your mic for intros and stuff, and I guess keep that nearby. Yeah.
If you're gonna talk, just hook it up so you're
Okay.
that way
Yeah, I think
you can be recorded.
You want to? I mean, we could test it with this hooked up and with the microphone in place.
Yeah. Well,
Probably don't want it right there. I could probably.
yeah, you can.
That would be distracting as a speaker. Every time you step here, jump.
Yeah, we got chased out of here, over there, we just kind of.
Oh, no, not for me. I didn't even know you were.
Moments this morning.
Kind of hard to learn the first time.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out.
The hardest part is you can't really learn in the middle of the game and then you kind of give away who you are.
Yeah.
So it comes with sheriff. I'm not saying he's sheriff, but
Well, everybody knows who the sheriff is.
it's the
Sheriff turns himself around, but renegade's not one.
Yesterday too, like on cases of the
Pretty good.
It's all good. Yeah, like
It's easy to remember, like, Bernie,
you do more. You do more. Yeah.
I really like the mock training on Rita. Like building the test.
Yeah. That works pretty well.
they did make Mr. Bird.
Have you been submitted for that class?
Every bit of it.
One time. It's more just well, I played around with it last year.
Does it make it hard to type?
Very
Conflicts are a little bit, basically write test cases.
Is it the film or the grid?
yeah.
Then you make those tests, and then you deliver. Like those are the requirements.
It works really well when you
Yeah.
when you're just trying to like buy this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
You end up writing a test and you're like, well, this is not how I actually want to write it. If you have a solid architecture, it's something new.
Actually, I just learned it. I did it all. It took me a month to get back up to. Not only the date to learn how to touch that without looking at it.
Oh, no, there's just a day.
It took me a week to get to about 40 words a minute. And then it took me a month to
Hey,
get
how we have to submit a business case at the beginning of the year. I think tomorrow's your deadline. Maybe it's a 20 minutes.
And I haven't typed for the last.
Sometimes these places don't announce it.
Right.
Like another site that still have the last year.
Started the Sabbath and everything. That's full time for 6 hours. They said they did that for 6 months. So I
There was, they wanted me to, if I was going to submit a talk to a conference, they wanted me to like get all my talks submitted to lay out what talks I was going to submit to at the beginning of the year and which ones I was going to go to. And it's like, first off, like there's so many things wrong with this because they don't let you know right away. Whoops. Let's see what I'm interested in. Which way do I go? This way? There we go.
I give you my phone. I type
Dang it.
it's set up to
That. I just want.
So whenever someone uses my phone,
Sophie? Hi. Hello.
Finally made it.
Great to have you here. What?
Finally made it.
Yeah, it's yeah, I know.
Like
It's
a
been
year
a
of
long time.
emailing.
Yeah. used to.
Okay, so that's how you know something.
How no? Yes.
Is that who she originally was?
Yep. I talked with her about it. She was like, "Oh, you need to talk with me." Great. It's wonderful. Oh, we are recording. That's it. So it's being live broadcast to YouTube. But there's like 3 people who might watch it. We're gonna have a mic as well. I actually have 2 mics. Okay, I think we're going to get started now. Welcome to Hill Country JS. If you haven't already grabbed snacks, there's some snacks over there, a couple of drinks over there as well. We'll get started with the main speaker shortly, but first we're going to do some community announcements and thank our sponsors and thank everybody else. And then we also have an open spot for like a 5-minute tech demo. If you want to do a short tech demo on something that you've been working on, you're welcome to bring that up and do a quick demo. But before that, where'd it go? Mirror display. Bring this over. Okay. First thing to talk about is Taco Tuesday. If you weren't aware of it, it's a thing that the meetup does, and it's every fourth Tuesday of the month, I think. They meet at Original Blanco Cafe, which is right down the street from us. So we're here. I guess I could zoom in. And it is here, and there's a parking garage right next to it. But that's just kind of an informal meetup during the middle of the week, just to meet and have lunch together and talk about whatever you want to talk about. No speakers, nothing planned. You just meet and you talk. So that is that. And then if you're interested, this is downtown, so I know a lot of people aren't in downtown where they work, and it can be kind of a long drive. If you're interested in hosting your own version of Taco Tuesday, if you want to do northwest side, southwest side, southeast, I don't know. I'm on the northeast side. I might see if I can set something up on the northeast side, but feel free to just let me know, and I will happily give you the resources to help get that set up. So that's Taco Tuesday. That's the first thing. Conferences, there's one coming up for Houston, Texas called Space City JS. I was lucky enough to go to that last year, and it was really great. It's a one-day conference in Houston. They have a pre-party at the St. Arnold Brewery, which is a pretty cool little place. They've got an open bar or an open tap there, and then just one full day. They are accepting speakers right now, so if you are interested in wanting to speak, you can submit a proposal there if you're interested in it. So just want to throw that out there. That's in May on the 14th. That's about the only conferences that I know that are near us. Anybody else know of any that are worth mentioning? There's Initech, which is actually in San Antonio, but that's more like business technology kind of stuff. Okay. Feel free to mention it if you ever do think of something. Sponsors, Geekdom is this is their event center, so they've been sponsoring us by providing space, and they also provide some snacks as well for quite some time, and they've got their little thing over there if you're interested in Geekdom, what they do and everything. So that's available to you. And then also food tonight and some of the drinks tonight were provided by Tech Systems. And Paige, did you want to do a quick 2-minute blurb on what you do?
Sure.
Okay, you don't have to do the microphone or anything.
Okay, well, I can.
Okay, you can come out to the front. That's fine.
Okay. So my name is Paige, and I work with Tech Systems here in San Antonio. We're an IT staffing and consulting firm, and I met with Kevin probably 2 months ago expressing some interest in getting involved in the user group. One of the reasons is just to integrate myself within the local market. I recruit UI UX, so I do talk with a lot of different developers within the city. And so just to keep myself educated on what y'all do and just to learn more about upcoming technologies. So that's really,
Cool.
that's about it.
Cool. Thanks for sponsoring. Very helpful. Yeah, that's our main sponsors. I think that's all I have for announcements. Let me actually check my phone because I wrote it down on my phone. There's a couple other meetups that are worth knowing about. There is the SA Web Dev, and they actually met yesterday, I think. They used to meet every third Tuesday, or every third Thursday, but I think they moved it to every third Tuesday of the month. So you didn't get it this month, but if you are interested in more general web dev topics, they don't meet here. They meet at the new CodeUp building. This is right down the street from here. But that's SA Web Dev, and I think there's also a JDev meetup. I don't know if that's still going on. But anybody else, members of meetups that they'd like to shout out to? In the back.
We have SA Coders, which meets monthly. It's actually going to be meeting next Thursday in Geekdom.
Okay, so upstairs in Geekdom?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that's around the corner and then up 12 flights of stairs, or you can take the elevator if you prefer. Any other meetups? Okay, yeah. Feel free to mention them if you think of any next time around. Who are our new members tonight? Who's here for the first time? Very cool. Welcome to the meetup. Hopefully you'll find it's semi-welcoming. We're all a little kind of shy, I think. Just as shy as y'all are, we are shy. This is, I don't know if you can tell, but I'm messing with my hands a lot because that's how I feel. But yeah, welcome. Please do make yourself at home. There's bathrooms right around the corner, so if you do need to go to the bathroom, there's a water fountain back there as well if you want some water. There might be some water in the fridge. I saw a ton of beer in the fridge. I don't think it's any of ours, sadly. Yeah, welcome to the meetup. I hope to see you out here again next month and find some value. One thing that we're going to do, we're going to have the main speaker, and then we're actually going to stick around. We might move to the back room because there's tables back there and there's seats a little bit easier to talk than this huge big room. But I brought some board games. We'll probably play some board games. There's some whiteboards if you want to do whiteboards or like some sort of like coding session or just you just want to talk about random things. Feel free to stick around after the meetup because we'll be going on after that. This meetup is going to be recorded thanks to Daniel. He's doing all of our AV stuff, and he's got it on YouTube. So if you fall asleep in the middle of it, don't worry, you can go home and fall asleep at home as well. Wi-Fi information is right there. So if you need to connect to the Wi-Fi, it's right there. That's the really important stuff to help keep you from falling asleep. So with that, does anybody have anything, any tech project they'd like to do a quick 2-minute, 5-minute demo of or talk on? Chris does. Okay. Do you want to do it on your laptop? My laptop? Sure. Here.
Be really quick. Has anybody here used Webpack before?
That guy's interested in it.
Got one interested? Nobody else? All right. Well, you guys aren't going to be very useful to me then. But in case someday any of you guys start using Webpack, so Webpack is a module bundler. If you've got a project that uses, ES6 modules or CommonJS modules, it's kind of an alternative to Browserify. It's gotten a lot bigger in the last year or so. But it comes with, Webpack has an analyzer tool. So basically when you bundle up your app, it gives you a bunch of statistics about your build so that you can see what's going on and debug things. And Webpack has a tool that helps to analyze that bundle, but I didn't think it was very useful. So this is a tool I made called Webpack Visualizer, and basically you can just drop your stats from your Webpack build into this, and it will spit out this basically visualization of all the modules that are contained in your application and relatively how much space they're all taking up. So this is just like a really dumb, simple example application, but you can see that 64% of it is made up of React and its modules, and 23% comes from this other, NPM module. And so you can see where all this size is being taken up in your application. So if any of you happen to begin using Webpack in the future, I'd appreciate it if you give this thing a try and let me know how it works. What I really need is more real-world test cases on how it works. It's kind of frustrating to work with a little bit just because you're stuck to dealing with the stats that Webpack spits out at you. But I would like to make sure that I'm covering any kind of off cases and things I don't know about, because people's bundles are really big and there's a lot of things you can do with Webpack. So that's it. If you ever want to look it up, just Google Webpack Visualizer and you'll find it. So that's it.
Do a quick demo of Webpack?
I'm not prepared to do a quick demo of Webpack, but you can look up Webpack. Their docs are actually terrible. I mean, they're okay, they're fine. They've got a nice logo, but that's about most of what they've got going for the documentation. I do have a gist that we could look at really quick on GitHub.
Make it bigger.
Yeah. So this is just a React and Webpack kind of quick start thing. So we'll just go and look at the Webpack configuration. So Webpack is all about having lots and lots of configuration, and it looks really messy and confusing if you're new to it, but there's a whole lot that you can do with it. It's incredibly powerful. So more or less, the main things that you need to worry about is you've got an entry point, just basically where's your app start at. In this case, it's going to be our main module. And then our outputs, where do you want to put the resulting bundle? What do you want to name it? And then there's kind of two things that basically Webpack allows you to jack in and do things with your module. So there's loaders and plugins. So loaders are things that you choose to run on individual files. So in this case, we're saying that whenever we see a JS or a JSX file, we want to run these two loaders on those things. So in this case, I'm running Babel. Probably most of you are familiar with Babel. It's a tool for transforming new syntax JavaScript into old syntax JavaScript. But basically, this means that I can plug any loader in, and it's going to execute on any matching files. And you can do anything. There's tons of loaders built into Webpack. There's tons of third-party loaders as well. So just about anything, any way that you might possibly want to transform a file, you can do. People use it to run, preprocessors on CSS files. Anything you can think of. You can even load images this way. And then there's plugins, and plugins are things that run on your entire bundle. So this is where you're going to see stuff like Uglify for minifying your code. So not too bad. It's pretty nifty. I like it. That's all I got.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Any other takers? Yeah.
All right, so I don't know if anybody's ever run into the issue of just having just a basic Markdown editor. I ended up building a little tool, SH, that is literally just an online, basic, simple Markdown editor built in AngularJS. On the left, you have your Markdown. On the right, you have your live output. So this takes GitHub flavor Markdown. So you can do your lists, you can do numbers, it looks like it's, yeah, there you go. It takes basically the same information as your GitHub flavor Markdown, and it even keeps track of things. So if you get rid of the page and then load it up, it actually keeps your document in local storage. So it's just built, it's a very simple Markdown editor using AngularJS, and the editor itself is the ACE editor. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that. It's a very powerful kind of a rich text editor for web applications. But this application was built to just be a very basic Markdown editor. The source is on GitHub, so you can actually go look at the actual source itself. As well. It's like that's basically it.
Can you put the surge.sh in your title? Okay.
So that's where we're at.
What are the other themes?
The themes themselves. So you got GitHub. So you got your dark themes as well. So you can get stuff like your terminal themes. The themes themselves also save to local storage, so it automatically saves. So if you're a dark theme kind of person like myself, then yeah, that's pretty much sir. That's my app Jester.
Cool.
Anybody else? Nope. Okay, cool. If you ever think of something before the next meetup or any meetup in the future, feel free to either reach out to me beforehand or just come up and be ready to present whenever the time comes. So with that, we're going to take like a 2 or 3 minute break while we get the main speaker set up. And so feel free to get more food or drinks or snacks or go to the bathroom or anything, and then we'll get going. I'm going to move this mic again.
Yep.
Cool. She's coming out from Austin. She works at GitHub. So she made the drive down for us. Very thankful for that. And she's going to talk about design pattern libraries, not design pattern, pattern libraries, and kind of why she thinks they're important. And I think this isn't so much a JavaScript heavy talk, and I think that's actually really good for us as coders to get to see the more design aspect, because it is such a large part of our job to work with design, and especially design patterns and how we can kind of create those tools in our day-to-day work. So if you all give a warm welcome to Sophie.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. As Kevin said, I'm a designer, so
This is going to be a somewhat heavy design talk, but hopefully it'll be, I'm a designer who does a lot of front-end development and then also works with a lot of developers. So hopefully this can help with collaboration with a team. So in here, is everyone a developer? Does anyone work for an agency? So either like a web agency or a ad agency? So everyone works on internal product teams? Cool. So I'm Sophie. I work at GitHub, and that's a pretty new change for me. I've been there for going on 2 months, so that's a new thing. Before I worked at GitHub, I worked for a company called Ushahidi, which was a company based out of Kenya that built a product for data collection and mapping. And it's a nonprofit open source product, so it would be stuff like if there's a large earthquake or an election that's going wrong and has a lot of corruption, communities can use this product, take it, customize it, and deploy it for their communities to enter in information. And then before that, I worked for a company called HappyCog. It's a web agency, and that's purely client work. So we did websites only, redesigns for big companies and lots of different types of companies. So it was stuff like Ben & Jerry's and Harvard, like totally random different types of products. So GitHub, I'm sure everyone here uses it or is at least familiar with it. All the stuff I'm doing is product work, so working on the product itself, doing design for that, and then also working on the marketing side. So a lot of that is making websites for, they put on a conference, so right now I'm doing that, any documentation. So a lot of it is marketing, generally all web. Everyone at GitHub, all the design team also codes. So this is a new thing for me. I've, in past companies, always worked with a developer and hand off designs to a developer, but here we're building and designing the stuff kind of at the same time. And there's a pretty strong brand at GitHub. They have a lot of existing patterns that we're then using. With Ushahidi, it was product work, but it was a little different in that we had a dedicated design team and then a large dedicated development team. So there was a lot of handoff back and forth. And the design team did primarily design and a little bit of like dipping our feet into front-end development, but not really much. HappyCog was all client work, so it was super fast turnover. We had to present work to clients all the time, get their approval. And what this meant is it was a whole lot of design before any development happened. So we would have just like multiple mock-ups of pages and nothing would ever get built. So I'm going to kind of talk about the way my design process has changed and how I've started to use these pattern libraries and style guides as a tool in my process based on the few companies I've worked for. So this was in 2012, I think, maybe 2013. We started redesigning Ben & Jerry's website. And what we would do is we would always need to get visual buy-in from a client before doing any building or selling of the site. So this would always be in Photoshop. Now I use Sketch, but generally a design program, not going in the browser at all. We would do mood boards to get the look and feel down, and the client would approve them. Then we would do a home page, some sub pages, and as you can see here in Photoshop, we're always designing one width. We were selling that page to a client the way it looked in our JPEG mockup. We would try to explain to the client that this may not look the same if you're looking at it in IE6 as it does here, but if you're not a web person who's spent a lot of time fixing bugs, it's kind of hard to process what that means, that maybe these fonts aren't going to look so good on their final website. So we presented to the client. Eventually, with a lot of rounds of changes, we would get approved, we'd be able to move on, and then there would be this handoff process. So for me as a designer, I would sit down with a developer, go through all of these pages, talk about generally what we're looking for, how they should work on different sized devices. But it was a lot of like trying to explain to someone how something should work. And they were trying to gather that from the mock-ups. We'd also end up having files. Is that okay? It's on here. Probably. Just think about it.
Nothing?
Nothing.
Let me change the cable.
That? Don't move. Just stay there. Hope the resolution's fine. So we would end up with these like Dropbox files of craziness. This is an actual screenshot of what it ended up looking like with really messy file names. I once had a developer spend a few days like coding a design I had done, and it ended up that it was a past design, like he had done an out-of-date one, which was probably my fault, but just one of those things that happens.
How do you get up there to the parking garage?
That way.
Trying this cable?
Yeah.
Whoa.
It's art.
No, it's freaky. Everything breaking. That's working. I think this is
Ah, there you go. Just put it down gently. Back away really slowly. All right. So it was really hard in our like design process and Photoshop files to keep track of what we were doing. And what would also happen is, since I'm not going to have 15 Photoshop files open at the same time, the styles start getting off. And like in any programming, I'm sure you're familiar with like the concept of dry. And what would end up happening is that we would have a ton of different styles that could really be consolidated into one. So this is an article from, a quote from an article that I really like by a friend of mine. And what she wrote is that she keeps a working styles document. So that's starting to document like what an H1 would look like, what an H2. And she would do that by keeping a PSD open just to track those things. So I started doing this, and it was okay. It worked decently well. But again, then responsive design came to be, and this stuff, you may have, like your H2 or H3 could be 3 different sizes at different breakpoints, and then all of a sudden you're in a mess of all these different styles again. So you would have bad styles. No one would know what the latest version was. If you needed to update something, like some company, say, changes their main logo color, you're then changing that in like 18 different PSDs. It's a huge pain. And you're selling mock-ups to a client instead of showing them what something's actually going to look like, which is usually setting them up for disappointment. So now what I do is I do any creative work in a design program, but as soon as I'm starting to decide on patterns, I move them into a style guide or a pattern library. And style guides, I'm sure, at least for people who do more front-end and design work, you're familiar with them. And I think people throw around the word style guide a lot, and it can mean different things. The way I define it is that it's a supplemental document to describe how things should look and or work on a website. So this can be really narrow. Like this is a Harvard Business School style guide, which this is just a PDF on their site describing colors and fonts, but it's no working code or anything. On Dropbox, they have a style guide that just explains how to use their logo. This is public facing, so no one really needs to know, exactly how all of their front end code works, but people may need to know how to use the logo and where to get it and what colors to use. This is Atlassian's. This gets even more in depth. It shows all of the different components that make up the UI, but it doesn't have any code. This is all purely usage documentation. This is Lonely Planet. This is starting to show the HTML that makes up these components, and I believe here it's the same thing. They're documenting every single thing on the site. And then style guides don't even necessarily need to demonstrate visuals. So this is made by MailChimp, and it's a style guide just about how they talk about their product. So the different ways of structuring things, the feeling it should have. And then there's style guides for code that explain exactly, tabs or spaces, and just to keep everyone together. So I talk a lot about style guides and I talk about pattern libraries. In my mind, they're different. A style guide explains how things look on the web, how you should use them. It has examples. A pattern library is all of that stuff, but has the entirety of the UI. So it has every component that makes up a site or a product. And it has the production code. And not necessarily, this is something I've, at my last job and now at GitHub as we're building this stuff, we're unsure whether the JavaScript should be a part of this, but certainly the CSS, I think, always needs to be pulled from the same place so that it's always up to date. This is a great resource for style guides that are out there, styleguides.io. I think it helps just to look at what other people are doing and how they're documenting this stuff. So again, my agency experience was doing mockups, then templates, then a guide. And what this usually, the reason we were doing a style guide is not necessarily as a tool for us to use, but as something to hand off to a client with the website at the end. So they would know how to update it, how to build new pages and templates using the components that we had put together, basically so that they wouldn't take our work and butcher it and completely change the design and come in and rebuild styles that they didn't need to do. With product experience, it's a little different because the people who are using the style guide or the pattern library are us internally. Since we're the ones using it and it's not being presented to a client and sold to a client, it means that it can be a little messy. It can be a work in progress and a living document that we edit and update as a team. So in general, when thinking about web design, I love this quote, which is, we're not designing pages, we're designing a system of components. And this is the same thing with a product. One of the things I've started doing at GitHub is going through and visually pulling out everything that makes up the product. So like the tabs on the top of the new repo view would be a pattern. And from this, we can start building other pages. And so we're thinking less about these views as pages, but more about collections of patterns that make them up. Brad Frost, who is a designer developer out of Pittsburgh, I believe he's writing a book on this right now, but his concept of this is atomic design. And what that is the idea that we're starting small with small little components and building up to large pages. So an atom would be something like a color. It's basically an HTML element, something you don't need to add a class to. Type styles. Molecules, you then use these colors and type styles and maybe borders to build something else. So a molecule could be a button or a list of links. And then again, you're building and building with these little components, putting them together until you're building full pages. So my process now that I'm done with doing everything in Photoshop and have moved to the browser a little bit, is I start just by documenting in something completely non-visual what the content will be and how things should be structured. Then I do any creative design. So this was a homepage we did for Ushahidi. I usually do a wide screen and a small screen, and these are just layouts to determine the look and the feel. And I personally feel, at least when I'm designing, much more comfortable in Photoshop because I can move really quickly, I can iterate, I can test stuff without feeling bound by my coding abilities. So I'll do that. Probably do 2 or 3 pages. And at this point, there's always a tipping point where I feel like I've done this idea of just enough design. So with these pages, I can look at them and start to pull out things and say, all right, I know the background's going to be this like taupe color, and I know the header's going to be red, and I know the type generally that I'm using, but I can always change it. And what I do is I look at these designs that I've built, and I start to figure out what the patterns are that make up these pages. So this would be an example. The main nav, I know what it looks like on a small screen. I know what it looks like on a big screen. I can start building it. I can generally figure out the responsive in-between styles for it. These links, these would be the same pattern. I can look at them and tell where the variation is. So these are the same. They have different icons. I can look at patterns like this. So these are kind of the same. There's a primary version, a secondary version, but generally the coding, the markup that builds them will be the same. And I start documenting these into the browser, basically, so into a pattern library. This happens way before the design is done. You don't need the design to be finished to start documenting this stuff. And this replaces what was my working styles document in Photoshop. So if I'm in the browser, the heading can change at different breakpoints. It can look how it's going to look. I can test it in different browsers. And so I start collecting all of these patterns. What I'll do is I'll code the patterns, sketch something if I'm stuck on a UX problem. I might design something in the browser. I might go back to Photoshop. It really depends on how I'm feeling, what I need to accomplish, but I'm not bound by any one tool. You're just kind of going back and forth, tracking things as you go, collecting them in the browser, testing them, changing them. And what I'm left with is this pattern library. So I'm tracking stuff like borders and type, and this is just all the basic stuff, paragraphs, lists, all the things that are going to make up my site. And I order them in pages basically set up with this atomic design principle. So you'll see the top are really small things like colors and type and icons and forms. Then we get a little more involved, buttons, navigation. So navigation is just a list of links. A selection card was just like something that has an image and type. And building up and up until we have big chunks of designs. And what ends up happening too is if you're starting on these small components, it makes it really easy to build the bigger ones. Whereas if you look at a page, it's sometimes kind of complicated to know where to begin. And I found that as I did this mainly just to save myself time, but there have been a lot more benefits than I realized there would be. When I started doing this, I would say I was comfortable with front-end code, but I didn't love it, and I definitely would not call myself a developer. I found that by doing this, and I'm sure that if any of you work with designers who are terrified of code and don't want to touch it, this is a great exercise to get them to start doing, even if it's just write down the list of type sizes and then enter those into CSS. It's not a very hard thing to do. But I started to understand how CSS should be structured, how to write it in a way that's reusable, with this idea of starting small and adding on. I think that's a great CSS concept. So it became, when I look at a page, it can be really scary to code. If you break it up into little patterns, it makes it much easier. Your design ends up much more modular, so if you're tracking patterns as you go, this was one of Brad's articles where I think this was on United.com, and these were all the button styles, because clearly someone had just added a button, and then someone else on their team had added another button, and then 2 years later someone changed and added another one. And this is because they didn't have it documented in any central place. But if you have a track and documentation of all the patterns, you're not going to run into this. Same thing with as you're designing it. These two items were on different pages, so I could have possibly made them slightly different without realizing. When you're starting to track them together, you can clean them up a lot. Same thing with the CSS. These are all admin things on our product that we were doing. Again, these are all on different pages. By coding them all together in one place, you can do it much more flexibly, see which styles you can reuse, but you're not coding all of these as a new thing. And because of this, your code ends up being much cleaner. I'm one of these people, I guess because I'm a designer. I like things very organized. So your CSS ends up being very organized if you're doing it in this way. By using Sass, and each of these pieces are imported, so each pattern has a Sass file that gets imported in order. So again, they're building on each other in this way. And it's super easy to go in here, find what you're looking for, edit it. Again, if you have a designer who wants to go in and edit something and they're scared by really long CSS or Sass files, this is like a table of contents of where they can go and edit stuff. You can do QA really easily. So instead of doing browser testing on pages where you have someone click through all your pages, test that everything works, if you do it on patterns themselves, it's a lot easier. You are able to just look at small pieces, see exactly what's broken, and once all your patterns are tested, chances are your pages are going to work pretty well. Same thing with performance. You can check that everything's as efficient as possible. For the Ushahidi product, since it's something that's used all over the world, a lot of the people who are using it are reading in languages that are left to right, or right to left, whereas we read left to right. So as a designer, this was kind of a bomb to drop on us because we had to flip everything to work in the other direction. We thought it was going to be a nightmare. Same thing, since we had all of the patterns broken out, it was really easy to just figure out how to flip those things and do it pattern by pattern. And once we had all of them working, then our pages worked fine. It's almost like a checklist of stuff you need to get through. It's super fast, especially for iterating. So things like changing colors or updating images or whatever, something that could be extremely tedious in Photoshop or a design program ends up being really quick. Another sales thing for designers, I think. Like, this makes so much less work. You only need to make patterns once. You can insert them anywhere. You're only needing to revise in one place. And you can prototype ideas. So what ends up happening is you have this pattern palette of all of the different patterns that make up your site. And you have a bunch of empty shells of layouts. And anyone at GitHub, we're working on this right now, like a prototyping tool for the product that even the product managers can use, even though they don't code. And all they'll need to do is copy and paste little includes for what the patterns are and put them in layouts to describe, just to make proof of concepts. And it's much easier to show someone an idea you have rather than explain it. And this makes it extremely easy to do that, to pull things together. What we also can end up doing then is just for someone, and this example, Ushahidi is an Angular app, and I don't know Angular, but it's important for me as a designer to explain to our developer exactly how something should work, like what happens if a user clicks here or clicks here. I could hack this together, it wouldn't be pretty, but I was able to do it by putting together my patterns so it becomes a clickable, usable prototype and proof of concept. So it becomes a great communication tool within the team to use as well. It's not necessarily just patterns, so our pattern library also described installation and setup, any packages we were using, the syntax informing mix-ins we were using. This was a great place for documentation since it's open source. This was really important since people were going to be pulling it down and using it. We tried to make this as helpful as possible, and this way everything's in one place for all of the front-end code. Again, we were explaining like how to add icons, how to import stuff, add mix-ins. We made a style guide for Ben & Jerry's, and since this was for the client, we had like how to update the website for them, including for their marketing team, what types of content, what the different content within the patterns did. So like this part of the homepage should show this type of content. Don't put a blog post in this area, it won't fit. So this isn't necessarily just for front-end developers or designers, it can be for an entire team. With this product and something we're starting to do at GitHub is thinking about theming. So you can take a pattern library. GitHub, of course, it's got a pretty vanilla design to it, but there are things like events, and we have our enterprise site that has a different look. And what we can do is take our pattern library and just easily reskin it to generate a new look and feel for the site. So in this one, it's not pretty. It's Comic Sans. But I just changed a couple of lines of CSS, and then you're able to easily make themes from that. Another thing is the pattern library becomes this single point of reference. So the stuff on the left is all Google Docs of a million different ways of talking about design and trying to decide, but it's impossible to find anything. What ends up happening is if everything is living in the pattern library, on here, it's all in GitHub, so our product manager can easily look in there and see what progress is being made. We're tracking everything in issues, and it's always up to date. There's no tracking down PSDs, seeing if things are done. Developers are not going to code the wrong thing. It's always there. And most of all, it's an accurate representation of design. So this was a big thing when I worked at my last company at Ushahidi. Half of the company was in Kenya. And we would have these moments all the time since they were looking at the product itself on their phone. If it loaded slowly on their connections, that, you know, I'm used to a fast connection, but most people don't have that. They were able to give us that feedback. So because they're looking at it in the browser in a way that people are ultimately going to be using this stuff, you're able to get a lot more realistic feedback back. And this would be the same thing for a client if they need to understand what it's going to look like and how it's going to work on a phone. So when thinking about like where the pattern library fits in the process, I like to think that it's almost like the anchor to the process. It's not a side deliverable. It's the center, and anything that gets designed gets documented in here, and it's always up to date, and it's the main responsibility of the design team. And then what we ended up doing is for the Ushahidi app, and similarly for GitHub product, core product, the back end of it stays separate. And we have back end developers working on this, then the designers and front end people working on the pattern library. And this is an extremely creepy slide, but these just kind of work together, and we're able to work simultaneously without stepping on each other's toes, without overwriting anyone's work. Everything's always up to date, and they work well together. That's it. So these are two, if you want to see them, they're both open source. The top one is the one I did at my last job. Primer was done for GitHub before I joined, but I'm working on that now. Does anyone have any questions?
Do you like GitHub?
Yeah, it's awesome, and they're hiring a bunch, so if anyone wants a job, you can work remotely, and I love it.
Is GitHub primarily a remote team?
It's 50-50, but they're very remote friendly.
With this pattern library, you actually implement it into your actual projects. Do you, when you actually update the library itself, do you ever retroactively like re-implement the patterns into existing projects? How do you do that?
I'm working on a new one now, and we use Bower, so you have to manually bring it back in. But I'm not sure how they did it the existing one, but that way we can easily bring it into the project.
Have you looked at any pattern library tools? There's one out there that's...
Yeah, there's Pattern Lab, which I have never used, but I've heard good things about. I personally like we use, internally at GitHub, we use Jekyll to generate it, which works pretty well for the documentation at least. And then at Ushahidi, I just kind of built it from scratch. I think anything that doesn't bloat your code, the minimum amount of stuff is the best. Cool. Well, oh yeah.
Do you have like regular design reviews of actual code to make sure that it's following the pattern library, to make sure it's not coming out of date or anything?
Yeah. So at GitHub, since it's GitHub, the process is just pull requests and code reviews. So those are there aren't meetings. It's usually, unless you need specific feedback or you have questions about something, it's usually people will just give you comments and approve or not approve things. But at both at HappyCog and Ushahidi, we would have semi-regular check-ins with the development team just to make sure everything was looking how we had planned on having it.
So I wanted to ask a little bit more about the hand-holding stuff, how you keep the designers and developers in sync and all happy with that. So how do you deal with, like, so that you've got your pattern library and that's like your source of truth for everything, right? So if a designer wants to make an update but they don't know how to code it, how do they go about, do they need to get a developer to help them integrate it into the library? How does that kind of work?
So the assumption I would say is that a designer, which might not be the case everywhere, but that a designer can do at least the CSS part of the development. I think a issue that we're having at GitHub and that also I had at Ushahidi was when to bring JavaScript into the process, especially for like interactions and getting things working right. And that's a challenge. So I know enough JavaScript to like get something to work. I'm not good at it. I'm not a JavaScript developer. So what we ended up doing for the Ushahidi pattern library is if it was required to show how something should work, we would just, the design team would hack something together with just like either jQuery or vanilla JavaScript. And then the developers would take that, be able to look at it, understand exactly how it should work, and put it in with Angular. With GitHub, what we're doing is we have a pattern library, which is CSS only, the product itself, and then a kind of in-between, which is a prototyping tool. So this pulls all of the JavaScript and then all of the CSS from the pattern library, and then we build proof of concepts within there. So I think that's the biggest challenge is like who does what for those in-between pieces. All right, well, thank you for having me.
Daniel, did you make sure to get the motorcycle? No, did not add that in, because that was really...
I tried speaking up. Could you hear me?
Yeah, he like drove up, and then he drove away, and then he drove up
That's
again.
the whole point of having a motorcycle.
Just to sit around.
It's just to be loud.
Yeah. Great, thank you for coming.
Yeah,
and,
thank you.
Please stick around after, and I'm sure other people might have some other questions pop up. Any other important announcements that anybody wants to make, whether they're looking to hire somebody or anything on that sort, looking for help with something?
I have a totally unrelated announcement.
Okay.
I live in Austin, and I don't know if anyone knows Dribbble, the like designer website, but I run the Dribbble meetup there, and we're planning a big, fun party for South by. So, if anyone wants to come up, it'll be good.
Forgot about South by Southwest. Yeah, that's a big conference.
Well, it's kind of big.
Close by.
Yeah, it is close by. That's March, right?
Yeah.
Sometime in March. Cool. Okay. Okay, so yeah, please stick around for just hanging out, and I'll probably migrate to the back room and bust out some of my board games. Steve brought one as well. So if you're interested in that, if you're interested in just talking about stuff, the recording for this is available online. Go to the Meetup website, and you posted in the link, right?
Yes.
I think, or you posted in the comments. You posted the link in the comments.
Yeah.
Yes. So if you want to watch it again, you can. And yes.
Will the slides be good?
Slides? Okay. Yes, I'll put them up there.
That's the same thing.
Okay. Could you put your link to your thing, and Chris, if you could put your Webpack visualizer link in the comments as well, just to help people interested. And I did want to say, if you have any feedback or comments, suggestions, criticism, anything like that, please, if you had a hard time finding the location, or if something just didn't work out well for you, please reach out to me on Meetup. If you just send a message to, I think you can send a message to me specifically via Meetup. They're private messages. If you want to be public about it, you can go to our Twitter account and blast our Twitter account there. Do that thing where you do like period and then @HillCountryJS so that everybody, all three of your followers Okay, sorry. That's it for me, and please stick around. Thanks. I brought